You're listening to an IOE podcast from the UCL Institute of Education. Powered by UCL Minds.
Hello and a very good evening. I'm Alison Fuller, Professor of Vocational Education and Work and Pro-Director of Research at the UCL Institute of Education. I'm really pleased to be chairing this event. What if our education system changed for good in light of the Covid-19 global pandemic, looking specifically at the FE sector? Under the current public health measures, we've moved our events online. We want to keep them as interactive as possible. So please make good use of Twitter and the chat function on YouTube throughout to share your thoughts and put questions to the panel. The hashtag to use on Twitter is IOE Debates. All sectors are facing upheaval and uncertainty at the moment, and further and vocational education is no exception. To help us review what the immediate and longer-term implications of COVID-19 might be for FE, we have 4 fantastic speakers from across the sector. You can find their full biographies on the event webpage, but let me provide some very brief introductions. David Hughes, Chief Executive of the Association of Colleges. Before moving to the AOC in 2016, David led the Learning and Work Institute think tank and held senior roles at the Skills Funding Agency and Learning and Skills Council. He also played a leading role in establishing the Education and Training Foundation. Cindy Rampersword is Senior Vice President, BTEC and Apprenticeships at Pearson Education. Cindy is responsible for the development of all Pearson's UK technical, vocational and apprenticeship qualifications, which are delivered to over 1 million learners a year. Her previous roles include Deputy Principal at City and Islington College, and in 2016 she was appointed a Deputy Further Education Commissioner by the Department for Education. Stuart Rimmer is Chief Executive of East Coast College. Having started his career in textile manufacturing and financial services, Stuart moved into education over 15 years ago. He takes a particular interest in well-being and mental health in education, as well as serving on his region's local enterprise partnership skills board. Jill Westerman is Trustee and Vice Chair of the Further Education Trust for Leadership, FETL. Jill's worked in adult education for over 30 years and was Principal of the Northern College in Barnsley until she retired in 2018. Alongside her FETL role, she's a Governor of City Lit, an adult education college in central London. It's great to have these speakers with us. As I said, I hope many of you will add your questions and views to the discussion. And as you might have noted from my title as Professor of Vocational Education and Work, I take a particular interest in these issues, both from a research point of view and in terms of practice. The IOE has had a major role training teachers for the post-compulsory education and training sector for many, many years. And I know there are a lot of colleagues at the IOE who will also be very interested to hear what our colleagues have to say today, as well as to hear all of the views and thoughts from the audience. So looking forward to tonight. We're going to start off with just some short inputs from each of our panellists, 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to our Q&A. So David Hughes, I'd like to invite you to be our first speaker tonight. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Alison, and thanks for the invite. It's great to be here. Really good. 5 minutes on what I'd like to see change in FE is just like my idea of hell, actually. I could do 5 hours, but I've got 5 things, that, not in any particular order, really. The first is I'd like us to focus much more on people as citizens. I think we're much too intent on seeing them as kind of economic actors, people we need to give some skills to so they can be successful in the labour market. And that feels like in FE something you do to people, whereas in most of our lives probably, we've used learning across our lifetimes and our experiences to kind of be able to build our resilience and our understanding of change, understanding of the world we live in, the ability to adapt and the ability to kind of lead change as well. So big shift, I think, in the focus of education post-16, or perhaps education as a whole, would be my number one. Number two, I'd like to see all of the incentives in education to be about progression, not just qualification outcomes or outputs, because we're just obsessed with levels and with qualifications and making sure people make progression up a ladder, as if like going up a ladder is the only way you can lead life. I like the climbing frame analogy. So this sense of what do I want now when I'm 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50. I don't necessarily want to go up a level. I just want something that's going to help me in the next stage or phase of my life. So something about progression in learning, in work, in life, in self-fulfillment would be really lovely, wouldn't it? Third, boringly, I'd like much better regulation. So I want a simple set of regulatory regimes for schools, for colleges and for universities. I want them to be joined up, but I want them to be designed in a way. And as someone who worked in funding and regulation for 10 years, I know what this means in practice. I want them to be there to drive performance and success of the institutions on behalf of, in colleges' circumstances, people, businesses, places, communities, because at the moment colleges are regulated as if they were schools, as if they were for-profit providers, as if they were universities, but not as if they were colleges. And the restrictions of regulation get in the way of doing all the things that they want to do and probably need to do for the communities and places that they operate in. So that's three. Number four is just to take education out of the hands of politicians. I sent an email sometime this afternoon to a group of college principals who just had a meeting with Emma Hardy, who is the shadow Labour higher education spokesman. I've been building quite a good relationship with Emma. I think it's fantastic. So I sent an email back saying that's great. I had a bit of an interaction with them about what they'd said, what we'd said, and we've been sort of coordinating. And as part of my email, I said, good news is we've also got a really good relationship with the other Labour shadow team, including Toby Perkins, who's fantastic, and Rebecca Long-Bailey. And literally 30 seconds after I'd sent press, Rebecca Long-Bailey got sacked by Keir Starmer. So we now have to start again with a new shadow Secretary of State. There's rumours abound that Gavin Williamson's going to be reshuffled. If he is, he'll be the next Secretary of State for Education will be the fifth that I've worked in my short time, 4 years at AOC. That turnover and the politicisation of it is a real problem. And I'd love to get into a 10-year plan that all parties signed up to, that was joined with or owned, if you like, by the sector, by the NUS, by employer organisations, by civil society more generally. And then the fifth is much more of a collaborative environment and culture to operate in, so that we have a better understanding of the core missions and purpose of schools, colleges, universities in the system, and that we play to those strengths. And each of those institutions and the leaders of those institutions can help support the others to be successful in the places they operate in. And that collaboration, as well as progression that I was talking about just now, are the two really big drivers of funding and incentives in the system. So that's my five. I could have spoken for hours about probably another 55, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. That was fantastic and brilliantly to time. So many thanks for that. And we'll come back to many of those points, I'm sure, in the discussion. I'd now like to ask Cindy to come forward. Cindy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alison. Well, I think what I wanted to do was start by saying that we talk a lot about it being an unprecedented period, and it certainly has. And as we talk about what FE looks like going forward, one of the things that I would like us to just stop for a moment and think about is how well colleges have responded during this period. So the resilience of colleges has yet again been seen very clearly in terms of them being flexible, fleet of foot, very learner-centric, and certainly looking at how they do continued learning and embracing, I think, technology during this period, and also working really collaboratively with us as an awarding organisation, other awarding organisations, and the likes of Ofqual to really think about what we do around awarding. Now, I do think that when we look at colleges and we look at the role they have to play going forward, I think it's at three levels. I think it's at the individual level. I think it's at the kind of community regional level. And I think it's the kind of the broader inputs into the economy. And I know David was saying that it's not about looking at it as economic inputs, but in a way, it's the kind of economic and the social piece. I think what we've seen, what's coming out of lockdown, is that we've seen a real focus around key sectors and key individuals. And one of the things that I think we ought to kind of stop and celebrate more as we're thinking about how we reposition FE going forward is that if you look at the individuals who've kept our economy going over the last 3-4 months, it's been many from the key worker sectors that have been celebrated. So the healthcare, the logistics, the food retailers, and the like, the public health sectors. Many of those are individuals who probably trained in a vocational pathway. And I sort of said earlier that many of them probably went to an FE college. And I think as we come out of COVID, there are a number of considerations. One is, where will the gaps be in our economy in terms of key industries? We know things like travel and tourism and hospitality will be on the decline, but other industries will be on the up. So one of the things that we'll need to do very quickly is pivot around our curriculum if we're thinking about outcomes and employability. I also think there's a real consideration around making sure that 16 to 18-year-olds and adults are I guess supported the right way. And I think it's going to be about access. And I think for 16 to 18-year-olds, some of that access will be about plugging some of the inequality gap that may have developed as a result of COVID, where we know that students may not have had full learning, and potentially there'll be youth unemployment. And once there's youth unemployment, actually the impact to catch up, or the opportunity to catch up is reduced. And then I think for adults, it's again the risk around long-term unemployment, and how do colleges play a role in really supporting that. So I think increasingly going forward, curriculum linked to skills and employability. So the role of vocational and apprenticeships will be even more crucial, the skills of qualifications like BTEC. But I also thinking about modular learning and thinking about online and digital and things like proctoring will be crucial for access, not just for young people, but also for adults. Interestingly enough, I think on young people, I had a meeting with a group of colleges yesterday, and one of the things that they were saying was that they recognise that elements of online is here to stay, but actually face-to-face is still quite important for young people. But I think to assume that we will go back fully to how we were might be a bit of a challenge. So I think as we come out of COVID, I think it will be about, have we got, is the curriculum aligned? Are there the kind of transferable skills? And actually, how do we embed a culture of lifelong learning that means that both young people and adults can continually flex for the labour market that will be changing? Because I think employability as a key outcome is obviously crucial for kind of both individual economic well-being, but also the kind of the social impact for individuals and communities. That was my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Very, very timely comments. I'd like now to pass over to Stuart as our third presenter. Hello, Stuart, over to you.
Thanks, Alison. I think I'd just echo the thoughts of colleagues where just pointing out discussions like this, I think, are hugely valuable because they help shape ideas. And I think as we start to sort of begin to anticipate some of the changes that we might see in our operating environment is really helpful, because as we know, there's the fragility to the sector right now. And so any change we're going to experience might have a significant impact on us in colleges. I think that in a recent test article, actually, I wrote, and I wrote there our media part this evening, that I wrote about a series of scenarios that might face the sector, and without making sort of judgments about whether they're good or bad, you don't have to really think for too long before a set of scenarios might come true that might become a tsunami that could overwash us if we're not careful. But within that, I'd like to think there was some opportunities, and I think the debate calls for, can we do things better? my overriding thought would be that we might have to face reality that in order to get something that's better, we might have to go through some fairly rapid and disruptive structural change. I think my overall desire, if I was going to have one thing, would be that colleges are recognised as truly place shaping, as place making. So in a post-COVID recovery moment, I think that I'd love colleges to be really seen as valuable and essential to economic, social, but also psychological recovery. And I think I'd echo David's thoughts. My thinking was around, I think we need a 20-year strategy, actually, with cross-party consensus that allows colleges to stop sort of continually lurching from policy to policy, government to government, and crisis to crisis. So perhaps we might take the politicians out of FE, but we might want to put the philosophy back into FE. I think three things for me would be slightly more controversially. I'd like to see a structural change in the ownership of FE to address some of those market or institutional failures that might be on the horizon. The second thing is probably a redesign of apprenticeships. And the third is probably the rediscovery of the Polytechnic. So briefly, the first is that I think we'd like to see, or I'd like to see anyway, sort of rediscovery as education as a public good. But for me, public good probably would be best operated in public ownership. It might eradicate the structural inequality in FE that is kind of a legacy, which might be around the quality of the estate. It might be around how borrowing works financially. It might be around the sort of artificial competition that exists in some places. So it means that there's not a level playing field. And the reason I always worry about a level playing field is that it means that less money spent on teaching. And where you do that, then there's a variety of experience. And so therefore, it's an overused phrase, but a postcode lottery exists within the FE sector. And I think doing anything that we can structurally change that. I know area-based review was unpopular, but I think it actually was the right idea. It just didn't quite have a wide enough scope. Its teeth weren't quite strong enough, and its pockets weren't quite deep enough to really make the change was required. But I think as these quasi-markets, as people like Professor Hewitt keep talking about, start to fail, I think there's a real moment now in time where we could do something fairly significant. My second one was around apprenticeships. To build it better, it feels to me like apprenticeships should be a cornerstone of recovery, because to help make place, they're going to be connected to employers. But I think they need really pride of place and comparative esteem to sort of increase the credibility. And maybe we need to sort of have a rethink about the quality and value that private training providers bring to the sector and ecosystem. And then the final point would be around the rediscovery of the Polytechnic. I think HE is just about to, the tectonic plates are sort of shifting in HE right now. And we might start to recognise that social mobility is more important, and we're going to have to rediscover what universities are really for in terms of their civic responsibilities. So in doing that, I was a real fan of polytechnics because they were institutions born out of place and born out of local industry and born out of teaching. And that feels to have been forgotten. And I think we'd love to rediscover that. And FE and the joining of FE and HE in some way, shape or form might help along with that. I could go on lots of different things because there's a change in social attitudes right now. There's the country's response to digitisation. But I think my top three are let's get some structural change in terms of the ownership and get the markets out of FE. Let's redesign apprenticeships a bit better than they've done now so that they can help that employer economic recovery and community recovery. And the third, let's rediscover polytechnics to help shape the places in which we live and operate.
Very, very important and challenging points. And I think that the audience will certainly want to engage with some of those. I've certainly got one or two questions as well. But I'd like to go now to Jill, our fourth speaker, Jill Westerman. Over to you, Jill.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you and good evening. Thinking about the future and the future policy we want, the role of FETL, the Further Education Trust for Leadership, has always been to encourage future-focused thinking. And there's certainly plenty of material out there to support us in doing that. Just this morning at the FETL board, we looked at no fewer than 17 reports that have been produced across the 4 UK nations that all touch on post-compulsory education. And in fact, I'd recommend if you go to the FETL website, we've got 2 recent things on there, a blog from Dame Ruth Silver about leadership, or leaderhood as she calls it, in response to Black Lives Matter, Also a longer piece by Chris Husbands called Leading, Learning and Lockdown, that really look at how we're emerging from this crisis. My background has been in adult and community learning, and I'd really hope that would have a key role to play in the future of education policy in the country. Again, plenty of research material to show the positive impact of ACL on well-being, on mental health, on skills and employment, on active citizenship. But despite that, as most of you will know, it's not in very good shape, largely because of funding cuts. So we've dropped from 4.4 million adult learners to 1.5, a dramatic drop in adult participation in HE, and it's a disadvantage to least likely to participate and least likely to benefit, which equally, I think, echoes what's happening with COVID. COVID and its aftermath will hit disadvantaged individuals and regions the hardest. And I think that regions with the stronger economies will recover more quickly. So London, for example, faster than South Yorkshire, which is where I live. The challenges we faced before COVID are still there, even though we don't talk about them much. So Brexit, inequality, work changes, race relations, and I think they've all been exacerbated by the current crisis. I do know that adult education can support positive change in those areas, but the challenges will be huge. And what I saw emerging from those 17 reports was a repeat theme, which was about the future being different, focus on community, place and joined up cohesive services. As Stuart said, I think collaboration rather than competition. And if you ask me what policy we need, I think it was something radical and imaginative that really looked about how place, community and a combining of resources could effect change. So the question for me really isn't about FE colleges or a vocational offer or ACL in isolation. It would be much broader, looking at shared agencies and something very proactive and dynamic where we work together in a way that's long overdue. It's not new. I think we've had discussions for a while about polycentric cities, people getting what they need much more locally rather than in a city centre. And even in the 1980s, I know some local authorities set up neighbourhood offices as hubs for their services. I think that that's an idea that needs updating and putting into action now. So colleges and ACL, I think, would be a central part of any future local hubs. But the multiple challenges be much more cohesive approach. So I'd like to see a policy change that almost demands collaboration, so that you've got schools, colleges, ACL, voluntary organisations, health, local authorities, police, all working together with and in the communities they serve. And I think that's the policy shift we need to be successful post-COVID.
Thank you very much indeed, Jill. And thank you to all our speakers for their really, really stimulating inputs, covering a lot of ground and putting a lot of challenges before us this evening. One of the questions that was in my mind before this evening, and I think it's derived from a lot of public debate since the announcement of the National Tutoring Service last week, and very significant financial resources going into that, has been the debate about, what about FE, what about post-16? And I just wondered if it'd be possible for you to give me a view on that, really. I mean, do we need catch-up tutoring in FEs as well as schools? It was a question that was discussed at our debate last week, which was about schools. And there was quite a lot of controversy about the concept of catch-up. But at least in schools, they have something that's targeted at catch-up, whether we like the concept or not. What you're feeling about catch-up tutoring in FE? Maybe we could start with Stuart on that as head of a college.
I think it's, for me, it would be, I think if the question is, do we need more resource to teach more people? The answer is yes. I think catch-up tutoring feels like a prescription rather than a well thought through bit of thinking. I think we're going to see in September a whole clutch of people coming from year 11 transitioning into college that are going to need something extra. I think we're going to have seen a whole series of people who've been in colleges who may have been planning to leave in the summer who might need to come back. We might have seen a whole set of students who may have had aspirations to go to apprenticeships that those opportunities might not be there. So I think David is probably better placed to talk about the September guarantee, but I think that's what we need so that it's that no learner left behind, and we basically need to be resourced so that no learner is left behind.
Thanks, Jill. I'm going to go to Jill next, because I think, Jill, you were bringing very much in the adult and community learning perspective and reminding us, of course, that FE, is this amazing sector which covers, a lot of learners of different ages with different learning needs and so on and so forth. And so I wondered what the concept of potentially catch-up tutoring in the sector might mean to you, and whether you think that's a good idea and something that should be supported and called for.
I think certainly for younger people preparing for exams, it would be very necessary, and equally for any adults who are in that position. Generally, a lot of ACL is unaccredited. It's not something where people necessarily need to follow a programme that has endpoint or need to do it at speed. What I do think is needed, though, for us all is some recognition as a society and as individuals. We're scarred. We will all have been in many ways by the current situation. And I think for vulnerable and disadvantaged people, it's not so much catch up in academic terms. It's about a recognition that we need emotional and psychological catch up. I think adult education can definitely provide.
Thanks, Jill. And I'm sure we'll come back to the point about wellbeing and mental health. Cindy, is there anything that you wanted to add to that? And then I'll perhaps go to David for a final word and then move on to a question from the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's linking to what Jill said, which was the point about inequality and where a number of young people and adults haven't had access to full learning during this period. And if you're on a programme of study and you're going to progress, and progression is really important, then actually thinking about how that's funded and how that's supported is going to be crucial. And I think it feels a bit inequitable that schools have been given £1 billion to look at some sort of catch-up, whereas actually for FE there isn't. And we know that there's a big cohort of 16 to 19-year-olds indeed. So I think it's about making sure that the foundation of the learning is there and that the inequality gap is closed.
Thanks very much, Cindy. David, would you like to offer some comments on this issue about tutoring and pros and cons?
Yeah, two things really. One is that in every recession we've ever seen before, colleges get more students, both young people and adults, for all sorts of reasons, not least because the labour market is a tough place to be in if you've got little experience and if you've got low levels of qualifications. And we know that the sorts of sectors that are really badly affected by lockdown are the ones where lots of young people start their careers in often low-paid kind of low-skilled jobs. So, we know that the young people and less qualified adults are going to be really badly and severely affected by this. So the package the government needs to put together needs to be enormous. We asked for £3.5 billion to help 750,000 people. Part of that was kind of catch-up support, particularly focused on year 11s moving into college, because we know that schools generally don't put a lot of effort into some of those young people who are going on to college, because they're not going to stay in school and they're going to move on. They're not going to necessarily get their grade 4 in English and maths, and that they struggle in college anyway at the best of times. We're not in the best of times. They'll have lost at least 3 months of learning, perhaps 4 or 5, and they'll be probably affected by all sorts of other issues of motivation, of hopelessness, of perhaps mental health and mental well-being issues. So we have been calling for a kind of a pupil premium type thing, which of course stops at 16, no reason why it should, and to top up the resources that Stuart and his colleagues have to support. I don't think tutoring is the answer, but more resources to pay for more staff time to support the young people who will struggle with English and maths is an absolute must. It's an absolute must for their progression in learning, and it's an absolute must if you believe in anything to do with social justice. So it's completely indefensible that there has been no announcement yet for any kind of top-up funding for that group. I think it will come, but it's really shocking that it's not come yet.
Thanks very much, David, and thanks very much for your responses on that. And as ever, think colleagues from our sector thinking really holistically about these issues, which is always very impressive. I have a question from Alina Congreve from on YouTube. There's 2 or 3 different issues in this question, and it may be that you want to pick up on one rather than the other. So I'll read it as Alina has articulated it. So she'd like to know, how do we support students, for example, tourism students, to have the confidence and adaptability to change as their industry rapidly changes? And if they do change path, how can we support them to articulate their skills and match those to a new role? In other words, to think about what they've learned in a one particular occupation or job, and how that might be relevant to, and how they might be able to present that as relevant to a new role. So there's sort of different things, I think, bound up in that.
I think quite clearly industries like tourism and travel and hospitality will be hit. But I think one of the things that we need to think about more and more is the transferable skills, and actually in a curriculum having those core skills that individuals and young people and adults can take throughout their lives. And actually, I think then thinking about the technical skills that individuals or young people might want to learn as they go back into an industry when it picks up. So, travel and tourism, I think I've heard 2024, which feels like a long time away, but actually doing a kind of doing a course that has those transferable skills, but then having the opportunity, I think, when they enter the world of work, to look at how they can update those technical skills. So I think that's partly about lifelong learning. I think it's also partly about accessibility. And accessibility for me is an inclusion, is about thinking about things like modular learning, bite-sized learning, and the funding that goes with that, but also thinking about how digital could be an enabler. So I think across the board, it's that, there's been a lot of research that talks about the future of skills, and it's those broad, soft human skills that people and young people need. But actually technical skills get changed very, very quickly. Industries get updated, but it's the ability to be able to do lifelong learning in a flexible way that means that you're continually relevant, I think. So I think really thinking about the kind of lifelong learning element here is crucial.
Thanks very much, Cindy. Stuart, did you want to have a go at that question as well?
Yeah, sure. Just very, very briefly for me, I guess I fully agree with what Cindy has suggested. I think that colleges are not skills factories. We are further education. The focus should be on education. We're creating citizens of their communities and hopefully global citizens as well. So if you think about the sort of, the acquisition of skills and knowledge is one part of a program, but the most important part coming back, I think, now is that broader tutorial program, the enrichment program, all the stuff we're not really paid for anymore, but by government, but we probably should if we're going to sort of help that social engagement happen. And I think partly what probably we need to be better at in colleges is perhaps pointing that out and signalling to students exactly beyond their sort of technical qualification what they're gaining and how to maybe present that to sort of employers or their communities. So I think there's more work we can all do in this space.
Thanks very much. I mean, I think one of the thoughts that your answers sparks off in me is really what we can learn from the long view. So I came into this area sort of at the tail end of the big youth unemployment crisis in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and the kind of heyday of government schemery around education work transitions, youth opportunities programme, YTS, and so on and so forth. And it's where we really, through research, focused in on this concept of sparring for people who, haven't got good opportunities in the labour market and found it really hard thereafter to get back in and to make their careers. So I just wondered whether, perhaps go to you first, Jill, whether there's anything you think that we can learn from crisis points in recent history, in terms of there being a catalyst or not for current changes that we might want to see. Jill, did you get that question?
Thanks. I have to say that I'm only I am getting every other word, but I think it was about, can we learn anything from other crisis points in terms of what education we offer? Yeah,
that's right. Yes,
I'd go back to what both Cindy and Stuart said in response to really thinking about lifelong learning, but also a curriculum that is less focused on specific industries or specific areas of skill and encourages a much broader based curriculum which develops an understanding of who we are and the society we live in and the various roles and ways in which we can interact with that society. I mean, just as somebody who's worked in adult education, I often used to get people coming to our access to HE courses, usually sort of men in their early 40s saying, I've trained as this, and I've been made redundant from both. What I now want to do is do something much more general, and then I can take my pick of jobs. And I think for young people, obviously they haven't had that life experience, but it's maybe about building that into the curriculum, almost making sure that they get the life experience by proxy, the realisation that they'll have to move from career to career, job to job.
Thanks very much, Jill. David, would you like to come in on the kind of learning from the past points?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I also wouldn't mind learning from the present, really. I mean, if you look at the Lloyds Bank came out today saying what do they look for in new recruits, and it's certainly not, as Cindy said, the technical bit. It is what they call soft skills. I'd like to call something more important, like profound skills. The kind of skills to be able to, as Stuart and Jill have also said, that ability to be able to problem solve, to be able to analyse, to be able to face up to things, and they're for life as well as for jobs, and what we know through all of the recessions is that what people are looking for is people with a bit of oomph in them, and they've got a confidence in them, and it's an education and all of the enrichment that comes with good education is what gives you a confidence in your abilities that goes with you. And that's why we live in a country where we seem to think that getting a level 6 degree is kind of the be all and end all. And it's because most graduates have got a level of confidence and a set of profound skills that we haven't allowed the FE system to deliver. The unit of resource in FE is so small that the amount that's available for enrichment is so paltry that we're not developing the human being the way Jill was talking, that kind of rounded picture. And we need to get back to that. We need to, for social justice reasons.
Thanks, David. Stuart, I'd be interested to get your perspective on this, because you had a career in industry, 2 different industries, and then came into FE 15 years ago, or education 15 years ago. So you were in a different place when we perhaps had the major recession of the late 70s and early 80s. So I wonder what your feeling is about places and times we can learn from.
Sure, I guess without being too autobiographical, I think I'm probably a product of recessions and how those things change over time. I think if anyone, it's back to David's point about how do you create a rounded individual, and what sometimes employers are looking for is all of those things that are beyond the technical. I think even locally in Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft, where my college is, the employers that are taking apprentices on very rarely talk about, they always talk about attitude. They don't talk about skill. They can train skill, but you hire for attitude. So they want someone who's driven and determined and got some doggedness and a slightly more resilient, that's a slightly overused term these days, and also who are personable, and they want in their team, and they want in their next to them in the brew room, and they want in the van, and those are the people who are more likely to be successful. But for some learners in our communities where they're not getting that modelling, particularly in socially deprived communities from the home, colleges are an ideal place to help do that modelling, and so people can learn to to interact in that grown-up way. And I think that's what we've been missing over the last few years, perhaps.
Oh, thanks very much, Stuart. Zachary Spire has come in, I think, with a comment and a question which links into some of this, and I think is relevant to the comments that you've been making. And I'd just like Cindy to come in. Zachary, so the curriculum for transferable skills and employability, is a brilliant point that's being made. But he's a bit worried, I think, that we may be reducing the ability of students to have more generic, more transferable skills if we focus on specific skills. Just wonder what your perspective on that is from a qualifications point of view, and from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of research as an organisation, and lots of other people have as well, talking about the importance of the future of skills, and those, human, personal, interpersonal, all the things that David and Stuart and have been talking about on this call. And one of the things that I think we need to consider is the bit that does make the difference is the enrichment. I'm absolutely clear on that, and certainly from my experience of working in an FE college, that's the powerful bit that really sets a young person up to be successful in the future. And I guess the question we should be asking, or one of the things that we should be thinking about, we're talking about reform to FE, but actually, is there a question around how we embed those soft skills in curriculum from much, much earlier on? And that includes early years. So actually we're quite good, I think, at early years at developing some of those nurturing skills. But we tend to lose it by the time we get to secondary. So my challenge, I guess, is, should we be looking at the design of curriculum, and should curriculum in the way it's designed have more elements of those soft skills? So thinking about the critical thinking about teamwork, thinking about resilience. Actually, you could argue qualifications like BTEC, where it is about the knowledge and the application of the knowledge, is teaching some of those transferable and soft skills. So I think there's a challenge around making sure it's embedded from early years. It's not something that we think about at 16 or when somebody is an adult, but actually as we look at curriculum throughout their school life, that actually there are elements that are reinforcing some of these soft life skills, because technical skills, I mean, you need the foundations, but certainly some of the technical skills become out of date really, really quickly. And some of that is about lifelong learning, particularly, for employability and key sectors. So I think that the challenge is, how do we embed it?
Okay, and then I think that raises a question then about online learning, teaching and learning, and the prospect that we, may well be required to continue to deliver our learning remotely, depending on what happens in term one from the new academic year, and also just in terms of social change, the way people are living their lives now. There may be more and more demand for online learning, which people can access flexibly and remotely and so on and so forth. How, from a curriculum point of view and from a pedagogical point of view, how do we marry those challenges that we've just been talking about in terms of developing a rounded curriculum and really helping young people and adults to develop in a more rounded way, using David's term of profound skills, if we're perhaps having to use a lot of online learning? And Stuart, I'd be interested to know what you make of that. How's it going in your college, the move to online, and how are you trying to square some of these circles?
So I think I'd probably firstly commend all my colleagues in not just my college, but all the colleges. The response has been stunning, and it's been rapid. And I think teachers have really had to learn new skills and adapt, and students have had to learn new skills and adapt in a very short order. I think my main point, though, would probably be we've done that from necessity, not desirability. And so any continuation of digital learning, I think we need to be a bit cautious, because just because we can doesn't mean to say we should. And we've done a little bit of sort of academic research from a pedagogical point of view. And actually, in the main, most students are reporting they don't like it. They'll do it because they have to, because it's the only way to sort of finish off the year and get through the qualification. But it's not what they really want to do. They see learning as a social activity, and it's how people coming together to learn. So I'm not saying digital's not got a place, but I think we need to think very carefully about what that place is and how we best use it in the future. So we're sort of using it in a very efficient, productive way, but not to replace.
Thanks very much, Stuart. Jill, would you like to come in on that? Perhaps thinking about the adult and community learner as a sort of group and recipient and consumer of online?
Well, as I'm only getting every word at the moment, I think I'd say that it isn't always as effective as it may be. But I think one thing that the COVID crisis has surely is the importance of being with each other, being with people. Any radio phone in, it's grandparents wanting to see their grandchildren, it's people who live alone wanting to see their friends. We're human animals who like to be with other people. And I think that goes for learning as well as other activities. Having that, I think generally there seems to be a recognition that we can't reverse ourselves out of the current situation. There's a lot of ways in which online learning is really useful, both in terms of people who may continue to be isolated or have to be isolated for some time, in terms of people who will have less money to go to classes that are in distant venues, etc. There's a phrase I've seen on the internet, people saying the future is blended. And certainly I think in terms of the pedagogical analysis recently that I've seen, blended learning comes out better than face-to-face solely or online solely. So I would predict that we'll move to a mixture. We can't, I think, go back to purely face-to-face everything, though it will still be hugely valuable, nor would I like to see a move wholly to online.
Thank you, Jill. I mean, coming at the tack about kind of genericism and general education and making things holistic, kind of in relationship to learning for occupational expertise, brings me to want to raise apprenticeship and a question about apprenticeship, really. I mean, the economic forecasts are, pretty serious in terms of fallout from the pandemic. And we've already seen some serious impacts on apprenticeships. I wondered what your thoughts were about how you can best sustain the infrastructure around apprenticeships and potentially enhance and even increase apprenticeships going forward, given that we need to have apprenticeships located and working in employment in the workplace, as well as in terms of off the job. So, David, just welcome your thoughts on that. I know the AOC has been giving this quite serious consideration.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are three things that are needed. One is to work more strategically with employers. So there are sectors of the economy that are going to come out of this quicker than others. So construction engineering, because of the likelihood of increased infrastructure spend by government, digital probably, health and social care. So in those sectors, what we're asking the government to do is to bring employers together with colleges and training providers and actually sort of plot a way through this, because I think it has to be sector specific. Second is incentives to employers to take on new apprentices, particularly young new apprentices, particularly BAME young apprentices, particularly apprentices from disadvantaged backgrounds, and make those real jobs. I think a subsidy that doesn't pay the whole wages, but it therefore asks for some investment by the employer is right. And then thirdly, we have to acknowledge that the collapse in the labour market will mean there will be a collapse in apprenticeship opportunities for young people and adults. And therefore we need more money in colleges to have capacity to help young people and adults develop their skills ready for when the recovery starts. Now, there's a whole range of things that are needed, a boost to traineeships and a relaxing of the rules, a particular offer for those who are leaving school or college this summer, probably a particular offer for graduates leaving university and college at HE this summer, and for adults who are made redundant, there's a really, really important short, intensive kind of turnaround courses that are needed. So, because there will not be enough apprentices. We already know from the figures out today there was a 50% drop already, and that's before furlough unwinds. And the post-furlough apprenticeship numbers we think are going to be shockingly low.
Some worrying times ahead then with regard to apprenticeship, and some serious and significant thinking needed in terms of policy, and certainly welcome the AOC's contribution to that debate. Cindy, did you want to comment on the apprenticeship point and the concerns about the future of apprenticeship and how we can maintain a high quality system?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with David completely that we need a focus around the sectors where there's going to be demand in the short term. I also think, in addition to looking at sectors, we should be looking at regional requirements and looking at developing regional plans to support recovery regionally, but also nationally, and addressing unemployment issues regionally, but also inequality regionally. The other thing that David talked about, which I think is a really good point, is thinking about the entry level pipeline of apprentices, and actually for young people in particular, looking at the level 2, level 3 apprenticeship pipeline, as well as traineeships. And I think on adults, it's really about how they continue with the engagement with learning, so that they could effectively step on to apprenticeship programs as they become available. And I think there's a lot out there around supporting furloughed workers at the moment in terms of both online and in college training, and really just making sure that in terms of the mental health well-being aspect, actually, that people are, for a period of time, may be unemployed, but it's actually how do you keep that engagement, so that when apprenticeships and the economy does start to recover and there is demand, that actually people are able to I guess, progress.
Thank you, Cindy. Stuart, did you want to comment on that from the perspective of the college? I'm sure you're heavily involved in apprenticeship provision.
We are. It's about 20% of our provision at East Coast, and I think that all of David's points I wholeheartedly support. I take a fairly simple view around this: is that we need to, if government don't step in at this space to support apprenticeships, I just encourage them to play the long game. There is no economic incentive for people to remain unemployed for long periods. And actually a bit of wage incentive right now, and some training incentive and some flexibilities actually will stop that scarring piece for essentially a generation who will simply just delay and possibly cost the public purse more money. So I think we could probably win the economic argument. I think we can win the social psychological argument as well. So I'd be really surprised if government didn't step in to do something sensible pretty soon.
Thank you. So watch this space. We'll be watching very closely over the summer. We've had our Twitter poll results in. The question we put out there was, do you think FE will change very much as a result of the lockdown experience? And just over half, 53%, say that they think it'll be transformed. 33% say not dramatically, no dramatic change, and 14% that it won't change at all. So just under 0.5%, basically saying no change or not very much change, and just over that it will be transformed. We don't know what they've got in mind by a transformation. So can I just ask you what you think, if there's going to be a significant transformation in FE, what do you think it might be as a result of this pandemic and this extraordinary time? Jill, would you like to come in first? Yes,
I think so. The gist of it, I think transformation takes effort, and it may be true that if effort isn't put in, the only transformation is reaction to funding cuts, and I would hate to see that. The FE white paper that is due at some point before the end of this year was before COVID, was promising to be radical, which implies there would be some huge transformation in further education, but I don't know what the status of that would be now. As you know from my initial input, I would like to see something really radical, which would take a lot of thinking, which is actually not looking at FE or adult education or education at all in isolation, but looking at communities. And when we were talking about apprenticeships, not an area of expertise, I was thinking we have to do something to support our entire communities. Otherwise, we'll end up with artificial divisions between generations, which I think are really, really unhealthy. So I don't know, the jury's out. Predicting the future is really difficult, and particularly difficult at the moment. So I'd like to effort go in making sure that there is a really positive transformation.
Thanks, Jill. And that's a really strong theme, I think, coming out from all your contributions, really, is that FE colleges are such an important institution within their localities and within their neighbourhoods, performing multiple functions and having wide-ranging purposes, and really being part of the civic and social fabric as well as the economic fabric. So thanks for raising that issue. I think it's incredibly important and makes colleges very distinctive institutions. Cindy, did you want to say a comment about what you think that transformation might be, should it come?
I think, shall I say what my hope would be more so than maybe what it would be? I think my hope, I would agree completely with Jill, which is that it's about a regional focus and community. I think the other thing, my hope would be that it really does focus on adults and lifelong learning, because actually that's about a need at an individual level, so the social element, but also about the regeneration and the kickstarting of the economy coming out of COVID, which actually we need to do, because the longer it takes to do that, the longer the inequality gap would be. So I think if I had, if the transformation would be less about silos, more about collaboration and regional focus, but also that adults are core to what colleges are encouraged to deliver, and that might be apprenticeships, or it might be about lifelong learning and modular learning and upskilling.
Thanks very much, Cindy. David, did you want to come in with a transformation that you might imagine might take place?
Yeah, I think there will be some positive. I think the collaboration is already stronger than it was before. It's not where it needs to be, but between colleges, I think that's right. I think the online learning and the blended learning will become a profound shift, actually. Some of that will be great, some of it will be not so great. I'm with Stuart. I think learning is a social event, but you can augment learning online. And I think that kind of mixture of learning online, not just teaching online, is really important. And I think there'll be some really negative outcomes, which I think, the sort of the vulnerability of universities at the moment, I think is going to come up with some perverse impacts in some areas on colleges, unfortunately. So I think some good, some not so good.
Thanks, David. And then to you, Stuart, and maybe, I don't know whether you think you picked up in your presentation comments right at the beginning about the potential for polytechnics and possibly an aspiration for polytechnics to come back. And I wondered whether that might be something that you might want to reflect on a bit in terms of transformation and kind of what the relationship between FE and polytechnic might be in that new world.
Sure, I think as David suggested, we're sort of in uncharted territory, and predicting the future is a kind of a dangerous thing, isn't it? Ascot was last week, and I bet on a few horses, and none of them came home. So despite my hope, I didn't do particularly well, and I think that's possibly the world we're in. So what we might wish it to be might not be how it finishes up. And I think we are, as David suggested, going to finish up with some perverse things happening within these kind of quasi markets. So I think that I do think that colleges, if they took a step into and with universities in a very thought-through way, could add huge civic value in terms of shaping places. So that's my hope for that particular area. And I think that rediscovering what a university is there for is a conversation that government are probably going to have out of an economic necessity fairly soon. And I just think colleges need to be around that table.
Thank you very much indeed. And so that's a really big policy debate for us to be engaging with going forward. We've run out of time, amazingly. It's gone incredibly quickly. So I'd really just like to take the last few seconds just to give a massive thanks to Stuart Rimmer, David Hughes, Jill Westerman and Cindy Rampersword. You've given us some fantastic inputs. We've really valued and learned from the huge wealth of experience and different perspectives that you've been able to share with us today. And I know that you'll be carrying the torch for the sector and making incredibly strong arguments whenever you get the chance to influence as we go ahead. And of course, we at the Institute of Education will try and do that as well. So many thanks, and hope to see you all soon, perhaps face to face. But that's all we have time for now. And thanks, of course, to our audience for getting involved. Bye everybody.
Thanks so much for downloading and listening to this IOE podcast from the UCL Institute of Education, University College London.